Snow fell in heavy silence over the valley as the last wagon disappeared beyond the ridge. Sarah stood alone, her shawl clutched tight around her shoulders, watching the tracks vanish into white. Her husband was gone, buried 2 weeks before in frozen ground, and with him went her place in the world. His family had made that clear. She was no longer welcome in their home, not even to tend his grave. They left her here, in the cabin of a man named Jacob Hale, a recluse who'd lived apart from town for years. They said he would see to her, but the look in their eyes said they only wanted her gone. The cabin door creaked open. Jacob's voice was rough, low. "You'd best come in. Storm's not waiting." Inside smelled of wood smoke and loneliness. Sarah hesitated near the threshold, unsure if she was safer in the cold or beside this stranger. Jacob busied himself at the hearth, saying nothing more. His movements were slow, deliberate, like a man long and used to company. Days passed with little talk. She cooked what she could find, mended his torn shirts, and kept to her corner. He chopped wood, repaired traps, disappeared at dawn, and returned with the dusk. Their words were few, their silences heavy. Then the blizzard came, a storm that swallowed sound and sense alike. The roof groaned, the wind screamed. When the door burst open and snow poured in, Sarah rushed to brace it, but cold seized her hands and darkness took her. She awoke later, wrapped in blankets by the fire. Jacob sat nearby, eyes shadowed but soft with worry. "You were near gone," he muttered almost to himself. His hand brushed hers to check her pulse, calloused, trembling slightly. That night marked a change. The silence between them grew less sharp. When she thanked him, his lips almost twitched into a smile. They began sharing the same fire not just for warmth but for company. He told her where he came from, a farmer once, with a wife and a boy lost to fever. She listened, and for the first time since her husband's death, she didn't feel invisible. As the wind eased outside, Sarah began tending the cabin with new purpose. She repaired curtains, scrubbed floors, baked bread from the last of the flour. Jacob didn't protest. One morning she found a small wooden horse on the mantel, carved with care, worn smooth from years of touch. When she asked about it, his voice broke on a single word: "My boy." That night, she sat awake long after he slept, staring at the little horse in the firelight. It was the first time she saw not a recluse, but a man keeping watch over ghosts. And in that moment she understood. They both were. Winter fell in heavy silence over the valley as the last wagon disappeared beyond the ridge. Paths through the earth. Sarah stood alone. The gray sky gave way to shy around her shoulders. Sarah stepped outside one morning to white, feeling the faint warmth on her face. And for the first time in months, she let herself smile. And with him went her place in the world. Found rhythm. His family had mended fences while she cleaned and cooked. She was no longer welcome in their home. They sat by the hearth, not even to tend his grave. Sometimes silent. They left her here, always aware of the other's presence. Jacob Hale. One night, as he whittled and lived apart for his axe, for years, she asked quietly, "They said he would see to her. Did you ever think of leaving this place?" But the look in their eyes said they only wanted her gone. Once, the cabin door creaked open, but some things you can't outrun. Voice was rough. The land keeps what it takes. Come in. His eyes flicked to the wooden horse on the shelf. Smelled of wood smoke back and to the fire. Sarah hesitated, but her heart tightened, unsure if she was feeling well. In the cold or the weight of what stranger the earth refused to return. Busied himself when the first buds appeared on the trees. Nothing more. Jacob brought her a bundle of seeds, deliberate, found like a man long and used to company. Figured passed with little use of them. She cooked what she could find, clearing a small patch of soil behind the cabin corner. Her hands bled, wood, her back ached. Traps, yet the disappeared at dawn and returned with the dusk. By the time the sun dipped, were few. Rows of silences buried in the dirt. Then the blizzard came. The following week, a storm that swallowed sound and sense alike. Jacob told her about his boy, the roof groaned, how he used to chase birds across the meadow. When the door burst open and snow poured in, cruel. Sarah rushed to brace it, him of her late husband, seized her hands, how love had withered long before death came. She awoke later. They didn't wrapped in blankets by the fire. They simply listened. Jacob sat nearby. In those quiet exchanges, but soft with worry. Something unspoken began to bloom. Gone. He muttered almost to himself. A rabbit stew simmered on the stove. His hand brushed hers to check her pulse. Reached for a ladle, calloused, brushing Jacob's hand by mistake. That night marked a change. They both froze. The silence between them the cabin seemed to hold its breath. When she thanked him, his fingers grazed hers, twitched into a smile. Not by accident this time. They began sharing the same fire, not just for warmth, but for company. Visitors. He told her where he came from one morning and recognized with a wife and a boy lost to fever. Quickly to town that the widow Callahan was living out since her husband's death. Jacob Hale. She didn't feel invisible. Sharp as the wind eased outside, like wind through broken glass, began tending the cabin with new purpose. Jacob noticed how the townsfolk stared. The blacksmith's wife turned her face away. Jacob, the preacher's boy, spat near his boots. One morning she found a small wooden horse on the mantel. His jaw was set hard, carved with care. They've been talking, smooth from years of touch. I know. When she asked Sarah about answered quietly. His voice broke on a single word. He shook his head. That night she sat awake long after he slept. Days staring at the little horse in the firelight. Sarah avoided the window. It was the first time she saw somewhere beyond the trees, but a man keeping watch over ghosts. Jacob grew restless. In that moment, she understood more wood than they'd ever need. Then one afternoon, a rider appeared. Marcus Callahan, her late husband's brother. He dismounted with a sneer that could curdle milk. "So it's true," he said. "My brother's widow living in sin with a hermit." Sarah stood her ground. "You have no right to speak to me that way." "I have every right," Marcus snapped. "You carry our name. You shame it every day you stay here." Jacob stepped forward, quiet but firm. "You best leave." Marcus laughed coldly. "Or what? You'll shoot me? Like you shot your own." The words struck harder than a blow. Jacob's fists clenched, but he didn't move. When Marcus finally rode off, Sarah saw the hurt behind Jacob's silence. Later that night, he sat outside staring into the dark, the wooden horse in his hands. "Maybe he's right," he murmured. "He's not," she said, kneeling beside him. "You did what you had to. The past doesn't own you." Jacob looked at her, then really looked. "And you? Does it own you?" Sarah took his hand, steady and certain. "Not anymore." The stars burned bright above them, cold and endless. Somewhere in that light, something like forgiveness flickered. Fragile but real. For several weeks after Marcus's visit over the valley, as the last wagon disappeared beyond the ridge, Sarah could feel Jacob's guilt festering, clutched tight around her shoulders, rose in silence, watching the tracks vanish into white. He left before dawn. Her husband was gone, returning after dusk with little to say. In frozen ground, she pretended not to notice when her place in the distance cut deep. His family had made one morning clear. A stone smashed through their window in their home. When Sarah rushed outside to tend his grave, she saw hoof prints leading back toward the ridge. In the cabin of a man named Jacob lay a scrap of paper who'd lived apart from town for years among the living. They said he would speak to her, jaw tightened, but the look in their eyes said they only wanted her gone. He spent the day fixing the window, creaked open, though his hand shook. Jacob's voice was rough, tried to comfort him. "You'd best come in, meet her eyes. Storms they not won't waiting. Stop." He said at last. Smelled of wood smoke and loneliness before it gets worse. Sarah hesitated near the threshold. She replied, unsure if she was safer in the cold or beside the stranger. He looked up then, busied himself with the fear and admiration, saying nothing more. "You don't know these people like I do. Deliberate, like a man long and used, she said softly. Days passed with little talk. I won't feed it what she could find. The next Sunday, the church bell rang across the valley. He chopped wood. Sarah had not entered a church since her husband's funeral and returned with the dusk. But that morning, their words were dust from her dress. Their silence is heavy. "I'm going." Then the blizzard came. Jacob frowned that swallowed sound and sense alike. "If I hide, the roof groaned. The wind screamed." She walked the mile into town when the door burst open a few paces behind. Sarah rushed to brace as she climbed the church steps. Seized her hands, whispers rippled like dry leaves. She awoke later. Inside, wrapped in the congregation fell silent. Jacob sat nearby. The preacher hesitated shadowed but soft with worry. Marcus rose from the front pew. He muttered, almost to himself. Look his who's found her shame to check her pulse. Sarah's hands trembling slightly, but her voice didn't. That night marked a change. For peace, Marcus. The silence between them grew less sharp. Peace. When she thanked him, he barked. His lips almost twitched into a smile. living
They
with
began
a murderer,
sharing the same fire,
God's
not
law.
just for warmth,
Jacob
but for company.
stepped forward.
He told
calm,
her where he
but
came
steady.
from, a farmer
Careful.
once, with a wife and a boy lost to
speak
fever.
of what you
She
don't
listened,
know.
and for the first
preacher
time
tried
since
to
her husband's
interject,
death,
but
she
Marcus's
didn't feel
anger
invisible.
drowned him out.
As the wind
Everyone
eased outside,
knows.
hail, Sarah began
Your wife
tending the
and
cabin
boy
with new purpose.
dead because you
She
couldn't
repaired
hold your temper,
curtains, scrubbed
and now
floors,
you've dragged
baked
her
bread
down
from the
with
last
you.
of the flour.
Gasps filled
Jacob
the room.
didn't protest.
Sarah looked at Jacob.
One morning, she found
His
a
face
small
pale,
wooden horse
his
on the
eyes
mantel.
raw.
Carved
She saw
with
years
care,
of regret
worn
there,
smooth
of
from
stories
years
of touch.
twisted by rumor.
When she asked about
Taking
it,
his hand,
his voice
she
broke
turned
on a
to
single
the crowd.
word.
My
You
boy.
all speak of sin.
That night,
she said,
she
voice
sat awake
rising.
long after he
But
slept.
what do you know of mercy?
Staring at the little
This
horse in
man
the firelight.
saved my life when
It was
none
the
of
first
you would
time
lift
she
a
saw
finger.
not a recluse.
He's carried
but a
pain
man
you can't
keeping watch
imagine,
over ghosts.
and still he's
And
kinder
in
than
that
the lot of
moment
you.
she
A
understood.
murmur rippled
They
through
both
the
were.
pews. The preacher's wife lowered her gaze. Marcus stepped closer, furious. He's fooled you, woman. You're blind. Maybe, Sarah said, but I see enough to know the truth. My husband's family cast me out like trash. This man gave me shelter. Call that sin if you want, but it's the only kind of grace I've ever known. Marcus's hand shot out, seizing her arm. Before he could drag her away, Jacob moved, faster than anyone expected. He pulled Marcus back and shoved him hard. Marcus stumbled, hit the pew, and went sprawling. Gasps filled the air. The preacher shouted for calm, but the moment had already shattered. Marcus scrambled to his feet, face burning. You'll regret this, both of you, he spat. I'll see you gone before summer's end. He stormed out, slamming the doors behind him. Silence settled over the church. Sarah's heart pounded, but she didn't move. Then, slowly, one of the older women, Mrs. Alden, rose and spoke softly. He's right about one thing, she said. This valley's too small for hate. She turned toward Sarah. You come to service next week, child. Don't let fear keep you home. The preacher nodded, eyes heavy with thought. The Lord knows all hearts, he said quietly, and he alone will judge. When Sarah and Jacob left, the sunlight outside felt sharper, clearer. Neither spoke until they reached the ridge. Then Jacob said, almost in disbelief, You stood up to all of them. So did you, she replied. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled, the first true smile she'd ever seen on his face. Maybe we can stop running now. Maybe, she said. But even if we can't, I'm not afraid anymore. The road ahead wound through fields of new green. Behind them, the church bell tolled again, not for shame, but for change. 6 Snow
weeks
fell in
passed
heavy
after
silence
the church
over the valley
confrontation
as the last
and
wagon
the world
disappeared
slowly
beyond
remembered
the
how to
ridge.
breathe.
Sarah
The
stood
gossip
alone,
never fully
her shawl
vanished,
clutched tight
but
around
it
her
softened
shoulders
at the edges.
watching the tracks
A few
vanish into
townsfolk
white.
nodded when they
Her
passed by the
husband was
mercantile
gone,
now,
buried 2
Tom's
weeks
wife
before
even brought over a jar of preserves
and with him
left
went
it
her
on their
place in the
porch
world.
without a word.
His family
Small
had
mercies,
made that clear,
but mercies
she was no
nonetheless.
longer welcome in
Jacob
their home.
repaired the last
Not
of the
even
winter
to
damage
tend his
around the
grave.
cabin.
They left
Mending
her
fence
here,
lines
in the
and
cabin of
replacing
a
the
man
roof shingles
named
the
Jacob
storm
Hale,
had torn free.
a recluse who'd lived
Sarah
apart
tended
from
the
town
garden
for
that had
years.
somehow survived
They said
the frost.
he would see to her,
Coaxing green
but the look
from
in
the
their
stubborn
eyes
soil.
said they only wanted
the
her
air
gone.
carried the scent of
The
thawed
cabin
earth
door
and
creaked
creaked
open. The smell
Jacob's
of second
voice was
chances.
rough, low.
Sometimes,
You'd
when the
best
light
come in.
slanted through the cabin
Storms
windows
not
just
waiting.
so, Sarah
Inside
caught herself
smelled
thinking,
of wood smoke
this
and
is
home.
loneliness. Not the house
Sarah
of her
hesitated
childhood
near
or
the
the estate
threshold,
her husband's family
unsure
ruled
if
like
she was
tyrants.
safer in the cold
but this
or beside
rough-hewn
the
walls,
stranger.
Smoke-stained
Jacob
beams,
busied himself
the quiet
at the
heartbeat
hearth
of the valley
saying
beyond.
nothing more.
Jacob still
His
rose
movements were
early
slow,
and worked late,
deliberate,
but the
like a
silence
man
between
long
them had
and used
changed
to company.
It wasn't
Days
distance
passed
anymore.
with little talk.
It was peace.
She cooked what she could
One
find.
evening, he
mended
returned
his
from
torn
town
shirts
with a
and
license
kept
to her
folded
corner.
neatly in his
He
coat
chopped
pocket.
wood, repaired
Tom's
traps,
wife said the preacher
disappeared
would
at
sign
dawn,
and
he
returned
said,
with the
voice
dusk.
hesitant.
Their words
If
were
you
few.
want,
Their silences
Sarah
heavy.
stared at
Then
the
the
paper.
blizzard came.
Marriage.
A storm that swallowed
He
sound
nodded.
and sense alike.
Only if
the
you
roof
choose it.
groaned,
The
No
wind
more
screamed.
forced obligations.
When the door burst open
Just
and
us.
snow poured in, tears
Sarah
burned
rushed to brace it.
unexpectedly, but cold
After
seized her hands
everything
and
they
darkness
said,
took her.
she
Especially
awoke
after
later,
everything
wrapped
they
in
said.
blankets by the
They
fire.
married beneath the
Jacob
open
sat
sky
nearby,
2 days
eyes
later.
shadowed but
no
soft
finery,
with worry.
no choir.
You were
only
near
Tom's
gone,
family, he muttered,
the preacher,
almost to
and the
himself.
endless green hills
His
as
hand
witnesses.
brushed hers to check her
Sarah
pulse.
wore a simple
Calloused,
dress she'd
trembling
sewn herself.
slightly.
Jacob
That night
stood
marked a
awkward and
change.
solemn,
The
hat in
silence
hand,
between them
until
grew
the
less
preacher
sharp.
said the words that
When
turned
she
two
thanked him,
survivors
his
into
lips
something
almost
whole.
twitched into
When
a
it was
smile.
done,
Jacob
began
exhaled
sharing the same
like he'd
fire,
been
holding
holding
his
his breath
breath
for
for
years,
but for company.
So that's
He
it.
told her where he came from.
He asked,
a farmer
almost
once,
incredulous,
with a wife and a
Sarah
boy lost to
smiled.
fever.
That's
She
it.
listened.
We
and
live.
for the first time since
They
her
returned
husband's
to the
death,
cabin as
she didn't
husband
feel
and wife.
invisible.
That
As the
night,
wind eased
the valley
outside,
glowed gold with
Sarah
the setting
began
sun,
tending the cabin,
and the sound
with
of
new
frogs
purpose.
rose from the
She
thawed
repaired
creek.
curtains,
Sarah
scrubbed
lit the
floors,
lamp while
baked
Jacob hung
bread
his
from
hat
the
by
last
the door.
of the flour.
A small domestic
Jacob
gesture
didn't
that
protest.
felt monumental.
One morning,
The wooden
she found a
horse
small
sat on the
wooden
shelf
horse
on the
above the
mantel,
hearth now, carved
no
with
longer
care,
hidden,
worn
polished
smooth
from
by
years of
Sarah's
touch.
hands.
When she asked
placed
about it,
wildflowers
his voice
beside
broke
it
on a
every
single
morning.
word,
My
bright
boy.
against the dark grain.
That night,
A promise
she sat
to the
awake
past,
long after
and
he
offering
slept,
to the future,
staring at the little
Summer
horse in the
crept closer.
firelight.
The
It was the
garden
first
burst
time
into
she saw
riotous
not
color.
a recluse,
Beans
but a man
climbing their
keeping
poles,
watch over
corn
ghosts,
whispering in the breeze.
and in that moment
marigolds
she
guarding the
understood.
rose. They both
Jacob
were.
built a new chicken coop. Sarah traded extra eggs in town. The same people who once spat their names now accepted their coins without hesitation. Time has a way of dulling outrage when faced with quiet decency. One afternoon, as Sarah folded laundry in the sunlight, Jacob came up behind her, rough palms resting on her waist. "You've made this place beautiful," he murmured. She turned, smiling. "We did." He hesitated, then took her hand and pressed it gently against her belly. "There's something else," she whispered. Jacob froze. "Sarah, we're going to have a baby." For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then his face broke. Laughter tangled with tears. "I'm terrified." "So am I," she admitted. "But we'll do it together." He kissed her forehead, trembling. "We'll teach them everything we had to learn the hard way." "Like what?" "That love's a choice you make every day. That family isn't blood, it's the people who stay." They stood in the doorway as evening painted the sky in gold and rose. Behind them, the hearth glowed steady, the heartbeat of their new life. Ahead, the valley stretched green and wide, full of promise. Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder. "You ever think about what Marcus would say if he saw us now?" Jacob smiled faintly. "Let him. He can choke on our happiness." She laughed softly, the sound carried on warm air. "Maybe forgiveness will come someday." "Maybe," he said. "But I'm content with peace." The last light lingered over the hills. The wind carried the scent of blooming wildflowers and rain on distant soil. Inside, the fire crackled. The wooden horse gleamed in lamplight, a bridge between loss and hope. Sarah thought of the woman who'd arrived 7 months ago, discarded and frozen, believing winter would last forever. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned the most radical truth. Home isn't something you're given. It's something you build with love and stubborn faith. She looked at Jacob, her partner, her equal, her chosen family, and smiled. "We saved each other," she said. He nodded. That's how real love works. Outside, the wind stirred the new wheat. Life continued. Not perfect, not easy, but earned. And as the stars rose above the valley, their story didn't end. It simply turned a page, toward the endless horizon of what comes next.